today I have Heather White with us. She's the executive director of EWG, which, if you guys don't know, it's the Environmental Working Group. And many people on the summit thus far have really referenced them as being their go-to source to learn about toxins. It's the sort of watchdog group that is really, I think, doing one of the most powerful work to protect us in understanding what's going on in the environment and really trying to work with the government and really big companies trying to change their practices. So welcome, Heather. I'm so excited for you to be with us.
Thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I think it was probably 2 weeks after my first daughter was born, EWG came out with this remarkable report, and it was called 10 Americans. And they looked at the blood of 10 Americans, and they tested them for different toxic chemicals. And they found up to 300 industrial toxic pollutants in their blood. And this includes mercury, it includes PBTs, it includes polychlorinated biphenyls that were banned in 1976. It included DDT, which was the pesticide that Rachel Carson made famous and was also severely limited in 1976, still showing up in people's bodies. They didn't know a whole lot about the 10 Americans they studied in this report, but they knew a little bit about their exposures. For example, they knew that they didn't get the exposure through the water that they drank, even though there's up to 300 different unregulated toxic chemicals in our water that's perfectly legal to put in there because there's no regulation. They didn't get it from the air that they breathed, even though we know there's tons of toxic chemicals that are released by factories across the country. And they didn't get it from the food that they ate, even though we hear and know of different type of plastics that can leach into food and different food additives that are unregulated. And the reason is that these 10 Americans were newborn babies.
Wow.
And EWG had partnered with the Red Cross to really ask the question, when does industrial chemical pollution begin? And they found that it begins in the womb. And the reality is that babies are being born pre-polluted with toxic chemicals.
Frightening.
I had just had a baby.
frightening thought.
Yeah. No, I was just, my first thought was, thanks a lot, EWG. This is really the last thing that I need. I'm trying to figure out how to breastfeed, and you're telling me my baby's born
toxic. Yeah.
Toxic. Yeah, exactly. I was really frustrated at EWG at first, even though I knew and loved all the scientists and I've worked with them for years. And then I just, exhaled a little bit and thought, oh my gosh, why is this system so broken? And really decided and committed right then that I really wanted to dedicate my life to environmental toxics and into policy specifically, and make sure that people understand that the environment isn't where you go on vacation.
Yeah.
The environment is what you're exposed to every day. It is the water that you're drinking. It is the food that you're eating. It's the air that you're breathing. It's the chemicals that you're buying and you're putting on your skin. It's the chemicals that you have in your home to clean your house with, and really help people understand that it's that direct personal connection that's so important.
Regarding chemicals, maybe we can kind of walk through some of the biggest areas like chemicals and beauty products and plastics, because those seem to be some big areas, and also things that y'all have some great guides for. So we kind of touched on it with these chemicals, that it seems like it's kind of, tell me, I know the stats because I have them in the book that I just finished writing. We were talking about that before this, but how many chemicals are out there, how long it takes to get one approved, who's doing the testing, all that kind of stuff. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So we estimate there's anywhere from 70 to 80,000 chemicals that have been approved for commerce. And what happened is in 1976, when this law was passed that deals with toxic chemicals all in our consumer products, it assumed that all the chemicals on the market were safe. Mm-hmm. So that was about 62,000 chemicals that were actually presumed safe. And this might be a little in the weeds, and I know, Amy, you'll pull me right back out if I'm going there, but if you have any folks who are listening to you from West Virginia, the chemical that contaminated the Elk River in West Virginia that basically cut off the water for 300,000 people, this is why we didn't know much about that chemical, because it was one of those chemicals that was presumed safe in 1976. So when there was this huge spill, we didn't have basic information about what does it do to health over time. There weren't really very many animal studies at all until Eastman Kodak actually on its own, because there wasn't a requirement that it released the studies, on its own released the studies that it had done. Mm-hmm. That weren't in public databases. So that's why we had the Centers for Disease Control saying, pregnant women, you can drink the water now. And then, a couple days later, oh, actually, no, you shouldn't drink the water.
Wow.
And then people who are vulnerable populations, like people dealing with autoimmune diseases, we're saying, wait a second, if pregnant women and small children shouldn't be drinking the water, should I be drinking the water?
Right.
So how chemicals are approved is a different question. There is what's called a pre-manufacturer notice under EPA law. So you have to tell EPA, hey, we're going to manufacture a new chemical. And then you say they have something like 90 days in order to say yay or nay. But there's not a battery of tests that EPA requires. And what's so interesting is that Government Accountability Office, GAO, so this is like the oversight wing of Congress, it's the oversight wing that Congress asked to look at the agencies. When they looked at EPA, they found that something like 85% of new chemicals were never really fully assessed by the EPA. And it's because the law is so broken. So a lot of these chemicals, companies do test them because they're afraid of what happens if it goes wrong, but they're not actually required, and they're not required to have a specific battery of tests. So someone like you could say, you know what, I know this chemical is used here, but I'm looking at this EPA database and I'm seeing these studies that make me as a doctor concerned, so I think you should avoid it. You don't really even know what the battery of tests are that are used to evaluate different chemicals.
Given that we're maybe the conversation that we just had was dealing with household cleaners, furniture, polish, things like that, what can somebody then do to be safe? Make their own stuff? You have some guides? Are there, labels people can be looking out for? What's the kind of take-home point of that for people?
Absolutely. There's so many different take-homes. I think the first is when it comes to water, because there are a lot of unregulated contaminants in water. And here's one of the things that's so strange about that law, the Safe Drinking Water Act, is just because something is legal or a certain level of a chemical in water is legal doesn't mean it's safe. Because the law requires a cost and benefits to the cleanup technology. So you may have like the public health, what public health officials think is the safe dose is very different what the legal limit is. So we recommend that people use water filters just as a starting point. Clean water is really essential to your health. And so what we do is we have a water filter guide on our website. So you can really figure out what is the contaminant in your neighborhood and what makes the most sense for you, whether it's reverse osmosis or whether it's just the Brita water filter really does take out a lot of good stuff, and it's a really low cost alternative. So we have some great things that you can do. So that's the first thing we recommend is a water filter. I think the second thing that we'd recommend is really be a label reader for all the products that you buy. And we have a great resource when it comes to the personal care space, which is called Skin Deep. And it's an app where you can really even scan the barcode and come up with a recommendation based on what is listed there and what are the ingredients. We also have a great guide called the Dirty Dozen Guide to Endocrine Disruptors.
Oh, that's good.
And so endocrine disruptors are chemicals that at low doses can affect your hormones. And I think that's what's pretty interesting, because when you think about chemicals that we use in consumer products, a lot of people just assume the dose makes the poison. That's traditional toxicology. But when it comes to some of these chemicals that are man-made, they actually act as hormones, as you know, Amy. And then in the endocrine system, the hormone system, a small dose can cause a really significant reaction, and sometimes much greater than a large dose can. And so what we have is there are chemicals that we're exposed to that you should get to know as a consumer and as a patient, as someone who's really trying to take charge of your health, what those are. So we go through that whole list of everything from, and we can talk about any way you want to do this, bisphenol A, atrazine, which is found in drinking water, perchlorate, which I know as someone who's dealt with thyroid issues yourself, Amy, you know that perchlorate is a thyroid toxin and it's a water contaminant, but filters can really help with that. But also mercury and the type of fish you eat, trying to limit. You want to have a fish that's high in omega-3s but low in mercury. We recommend sardines and anchovies and trying to avoid tuna, for example, which is high in mercury. And then also organophosphate pesticides, which can be a big problem. We've known that they can affect neurological development in kids, and the American Academy of Pediatrics has actually really recommended that parents start thinking about organic food as opposed to conventional food. We want everyone to eat more fruits and vegetables, but it's really important to try to choose organic where you can to reduce your exposure to pesticides. So tap filter, a filter for your tap water, buy organic when you can to reduce toxic exposures. Really become a label reader and get to know what you're buying, and we have some great tools to help you decipher and decode what all those 18 syllable ingredients are on the back of your products. And then finally, we would say just really be active in your community and think about reducing single-use plastic and thinking about really kind of forming these networks where you can share your information.
Can you speak to, a lot of people, they were afraid to drink the tap water, and then they perceived the bottled water as being a safer alternative. Right. So if we could speak to how that's unregulated and not necessarily safer, and then you get into the plastics and then the environmental impact of all those bottles.
Exactly. No, I think you outlined it perfectly, the issues when it comes to bottled water. We actually did an investigation a couple of years ago where we did a bottled water report card. Mm-hmm. First, we just encourage people, unless you're in an emergency situation, which we totally understand.
Of course. Right? I was in Nicaragua recently. I was drinking it, drinking it, I felt horrible. I mean, I didn't feel bad, but I felt terrible about the environment. I felt psychologically bad that I was ingesting all these, plastics or, and anyway, but yes, you have to do what you need to do in certain situations, but that's not the ideal on a daily basis.
Right. Exactly. So we recommend that you filter your tap water, and here's why. That bottled water, the water that goes into the bottles is not well regulated by any means by the FDA. You don't actually know, you're not required to say where it is specifically sourced or what the specific treatment technology is. And in some instances, we have found bottled water where really it is just tap water. It's municipal tap water right out of a sink, in many jurisdictions where companies just put the tap water and bottle it and then sell it at the point of sale. So because it's not very standardized, we really recommend that people use a filtered tap water. And then this other issue of plastics. So we know that when plastics get hot, there are chemicals that are in the plastic that can leach into the water. And there have been chemicals of concern. And bisphenol A, BPA, many of your followers may be aware of. This was recently removed from a lot of baby bottles and sippy cups. But if you think about it, this didn't happen when I had kids. My kids are 7 and 9 now, and it was only really a couple of years ago that people started taking BPA out of out of sippy cups and baby bottles. But those are specifically supposed to be heated.
Right. I mean, I was at a friend of a friend's house the other night, and she had breastfed, put the breast milk into the baby bottle, which was plastic, and then put it in this apparatus to heat it up. And I mean, I was just, and they weren't my friend. Even if they had been mine, I wouldn't have felt comfortable saying anything, but they weren't my friends. And so I really was just like, oh my gosh, I just, out of my heart, just was wrenching. And I just wanted to say, and then, which people don't, water is obviously water, but breast milk has fats in it. And those fats pull in those bisphenol A's and all of the plastics even more.
Yes,
so
exactly. And bisphenol A is one of those chemicals we were talking about that's man-made, but it acts as an estrogen. And there have been more than 200 studies, mostly in animals, linking it from everything from heart disease to obesity to neurological development issues to breast cancer. So we know we have this powerful estrogen-like chemical that can leach out of plastic. So that's another reason. It's not necessarily in the plastic water bottles you see. It's usually that chemical, BPA, is in some of the clear plastic bottles that you see. The hard ones, but the soft ones, we actually tried to do a study on the chemicals that leach into it, and we got all this. We sent a Freedom of Information Act request to the Food and Drug Administration, and basically all the information we got was completely redacted. So we weren't able to get the industry's test because they're trade secrets, what chemicals are in the plastic.
I heard the ones that are softer actually have more chemicals in them and can be worse. And so bisphenol A has just gotten this bad rap, right? Like everybody, bisphenol A, now we have all these BPA-free plastic bottles. And I've always said it's still plastic. That's just the one they're focusing on now. What's the one coming down the pipeline? Right. And sure enough, in my book, I have this chart of all the different plastics that are considered BPA-free, but still all the problems that they cause. So then there's this whole misnomer that, I got the BPA water bottle for myself or for my baby or for whatever, but it's coming down the pike at some point about all those chemicals in those plastics.
It's so true. And this is kind of when I was talking about the law needs to be changed because chemicals aren't required to be proven safe. And there aren't these battery tests that EPA requires before they go on the market. We don't really know what the alternative is to bisphenol A. We think it's bisphenol S instead of bisphenol A, which is very similar in the chemical structure. And there's been new studies coming out that it may act similarly in the body. So we got it off the market, huge win for public health, but then what's the replacement? And then we don't know what the replacement means and what it does. So that is a long way of saying choose glass.
Yes.
And try to avoid single-use plastic when you can. One of the things we talk about is is having that stainless steel water bottle that you reuse. That's just a great thing that you can do to make sure that you're staying hydrated, you're drinking clean water, you're taking care of yourself, but not end up having your plastic bottle go into a landfill and then have all those bits of plastic break down. We also encourage people to try to avoid straws. That's one of those little things.
I know, I do actually like a straw.
Yeah, exactly. We have like a cool stainless steel straw.
That's what I need to get. That's what I need to get. Yeah, okay. I'll get one of those as soon as I'm done. As soon as I'm done with this interview, I'm getting one. I will.
Yeah. If you use it for just a couple seconds, then it goes to landfill.
Right. And so two things to think about with the landfill that I don't think people often make this connection as well is not only is it going into the landfill and, you know, it's physically taking up space in the landfill, but it also, when it begins to break down, leaches into the soil and goes into the water and goes into the soil that then the animals, even your grass-fed beef, eat, or it gets into the water and then goes into the rain and comes down. So even if you don't care about the landfill, but you do care about what you ingest otherwise, a lot of that plastic is then getting back into the environment and polluting the environment in another kind of way. Is that
absolutely
correct?
That's exactly right. And that's why our whole mission at EWG is to help people live healthier lives every day and to understand that the environment and protecting the environment is a key part of protecting your health.
Right. So take home point is that bottled water is not regulated the same way tap water is. So you're better off drinking filtered tap water and drinking out of glass and stainless steel.
Yes.
So let's talk body products, because that's another thing. People are thinking I'm not physically ingesting it. I mean, the ways that I think toxins get into our body is that we breathe them in, we eat them or drink them, or they come in through our skin.
The average person uses 10 to 12 personal care products a day. Everything from toothpaste to deodorant to perfume to lotion, blush, foundation. I mean, our joke is that even guys, we know they use toothpaste and deodorant. So they're using personal care products as well. And most people use these ingredients in products with these ingredients without really even thinking about it, without a second thought, when it is quickly absorbed by the skin. And the average person is exposed to about 126 different ingredients, separate ingredients used in those personal care products a day. And what's hard for us to believe, I was just telling you about this piece of law that deals with chemicals and consumer products. If you can believe it, the law that deals with chemicals and personal care products is even worse and even broken. And it was passed in 1938 and hasn't been updated since 1938. And think about how much we've learned in the medical field, since 1938, much less how are chemicals affecting us over time.
Well, and think about what our grandparents, I guess, have been using as beauty care products back in 1938, right? I mean, it wasn't the number of things that we have out there, and they might have been using something simple like coconut oil just naturally as a creamer or something. I mean, I can just see how the industry is completely, changed in my lifetime, much less, my parents' or grandparents' lifetime.
No, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that's so interesting too about organic food. Like one of my colleagues says, look, everyone ate organic until World War II. And it was after World War II that we had all these chemicals that we had developed in warfare that we could then apply to crops to kill bugs. But, just like you were saying, thinking about what your grandmother wore. Although I will say the reason that cosmetics was included into the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act is because there were some really horrible products on the market in 1938 that people were using, and that there was one woman who tried to dye her eyelashes. She dyed her eyelashes a dark black and became blind.
Wow.
Because there was a toxic chemical used there. And that's why in 1938, cosmetics actually became an issue of concern because of that. So we really need to make sure that you're aware of what you're putting on your skin and some of the chemicals. And we have a great list on our Skin Deep website, so ewg.org/Skin Deep, that will tell you here are chemicals to avoid. Two big classes that we recommend people focus on are the parabens and phthalates. Both of them have been shown to mimic and affect your hormone system and really mimic estrogen specifically. So we really encourage people to try to go paraben-free and really avoid phthalates in their lotions in particular.
Right. And if you look at the back of your bottles, these are in virtually every shampoo, lotion, sunscreen, unless you're specifically, now obviously companies have gotten on board and they're either coming up as a natural company and not using them, or, through the work of you all hounding them, they've taken them out or things like that. So, and they can be under names that isn't just a whatever paraben. I mean, you have to look for the sort of end name, right, to know that it could be in a phthalate. Yeah.
Yes.
So, so what can people do? Because there's this idea of something called greenwashing, which is that it's sort of like organic or gluten-free now. I mean, there are these buzzwords, and it seems to be really prevalent in the beauty industry, that it's organic or it's all natural. So even things that can be organic and all natural can still have these in them. So what are some things besides, looking through the ingredients and taking your card and matching, does it have this or not, which might be too overwhelming for people? What are some big kind of things either to know, like it could be organic but still contain this? I mean, what should they be looking for on a bottle?
Right. I think you want to really flag the most toxic ingredients that you're concerned about. So paraben and phthalate free, you really want to focus on. I know we've had previous conversations before, Amy, about there is lead in lipstick, and there's no safe level of lead, and it's perfectly legal for there to be lead in lipstick. So avoid the bright red lipsticks when you can. Also, we've found mercury that's used as a preservative, the Marisol, which, it's in vaccines as well, it has been, but the Marisol used as a preservative and mascara. So you do want to be educated on kind of these key chemicals. When it comes to natural is just kind of the Wild West. I mean, we know a lot of great lines that are completely green and really focused and use the word natural. We recommend people avoid that because organic at least has some regulations, but even organic when it comes to cosmetics and skincare is not well regulated. Organic food is a much different story where we really encourage people to eat organic food. There's been all kinds of studies about reducing pesticide exposure, and there's even potential for greater nutrition density and nutrient density in organic food because of the way that the food is grown. But when it comes to personal care products, it's just really, organic is better than natural. Natural is not unregulated. So I would really say, before you believe the claims, don't focus on the claims, focus on what's in the product, because there is a lot of greenwashing going on. So with that said, the exciting thing is that more and more brands are seeing that this is the future and that consumers expect personal care products that are healthy. They don't want something that's ending up. We found synthetic musks in those newborn babies that we tested, and those were used in perfumes. Like when a pregnant mom uses a perfume, she's not thinking that part of this perfume is going to end up in her baby. Right. That's not okay. Right. And so we're seeing more and more companies reacting to that, which is good.
Yeah. So with the lead in lipstick, obviously they're not putting that on the label as an ingredient. So, I guess using the database that you guys have and checking your lipstick or finding companies that are reputable and definitely not using these things because they've, made some mission statement towards that, or, that's just, the mission of their business. How would somebody know, was their red lipstick okay or not?
You know what? They don't. They just don't. There's no requirement for it to be tested. It's actually FDA did a whole series of tests and found 97% of the red lipsticks had lead. And they say it's because of the coloring. That's what industry keeps telling us. To get that red color, you're going to have lead. I've also heard other industry people tell us it's in the air, and they can't find a facility that doesn't have lead in the air. I think it actually is the colorant issue. So it's unfortunate, something that consumers really just don't have an answer to that specific one other than use a different shade. So my whole thing is, like, every now and then, of course, you can wear your red lipstick, but just be mindful of that.
Right. And so one other thing that I believe I understand correctly, and I'd love to know from you, is when something says like fragrance, that is considered their trade secret as well. It's sort of like natural ingredients or spices, and it doesn't need to be disclosed. And that often could come from another source. Say, L'Oreal, I'm not picking on any particular company here, has a shampoo and they want it to be, lime scent or something, and they get this lime scent from a manufacturer, and it's, fragrance lime. That actually could contain parabens or phthalates in it, and L'Oreal not know about that, and L'Oreal could then label their product as not containing phthalates and parabens. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And we have this situation too with fragrance where we did a big study with the Campaign for Safe Cosmetics. It was EWG and the Campaign for Safe Cosmetic, called Not So Sexy. And we looked at famous stars' brands of perfumes and found 15 to 30, it may have been, I think it's 30, but at least 15 or more phthalates, different phthalates. which have been shown to affect your endocrine system as well in these fragrances. And they didn't know, but you're absolutely right. The big brands go someplace else to a fragrance house in order to get those ingredients, and they don't know. And one of the things we're really pushing for when it comes to updating the law that deals with cosmetics is that we should have disclosure of fragrance and what's in it. We don't necessarily need to know it's 0.025 or 0.5% or 1.1% or whatever. That's the trade secret part. The fact that you have this as your base and you're using this and this, that should be disclosed to the public.
So I always tell people, don't ever buy anything that says fragrance, because all bets are off. I mean, even if it's on the label and says no parabens, no phthalates, if it then says, a fragrance, that just counteracted that.
You're absolutely right. And more and more people are having allergies or reactions to fragrance. And that's one of the things that more workplaces are going fragrance free because of that situation, especially when people are, their immune system is compromised. They're like certain smells.
Oh yeah. We're a fragrance free office for sure. So we kind of alluded to organics and foods, and you guys are great. I think pretty much everybody on the earth, if they're ever referencing, if you can't afford organics, go to EWG and look at their, Dirty Dozen list and Clean 13. So love to hear about the importance of organics.
Sure, absolutely. So we really recommend that people do what they can to reduce their exposure to pesticides, because as you know, pesticides are chemicals that are designed to kill things and often act as a neurotoxin, even at really low doses. And so we understand that not everyone can afford organic, which is why we did this really cool guide called the Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen. Thank you, Amy, for the plug. I appreciate it. But it's really helpful. It's based on Department of Agriculture data that comes out every year on the number of pesticides on different fruits and vegetables. And for example, a typical strawberry could have 52 different pesticides on the strawberry. And so we just want people to know, look, if your dollar is limited, and everybody's dollar is limited, especially now, post recession, really, this is where you should go organic. You should definitely buy the organic strawberries, organic blueberries, you name it. And this is what makes sense to go conventional based on the pesticide residues. But the reason we recommend organic is that with organic and with the USDA seal of organic, what you know what you're getting. There could be more money for enforcement, you name it, but it's pretty well regulated, and that means that you have a GMO-free product. You are not using synthetic fertilizers. There's not synthetic pesticides that are used as well, and that the land is managed sustainably. And that's one of the things we want people to connect the food that they eat not only with their health, but the way it's grown with their health, because all these excess fertilizers, these toxic chemicals end up in our water supply and are run off into the water supply, and how important it is for us to be mindful of how the food is grown and how that ultimately affects our health and affects the health of our children. We also have a really cool resource I'll just share with you. It's called Good Food on a Tight Budget.
Oh, great.
And this is something that we did, Amy, that you may not be familiar with, but we took our Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 guide and our concerns about BPA, which we'd mentioned in hard plastic, but we hadn't mentioned it in canned food. And so we looked at that, and we looked at all of this research that we've done, and then we took a SNAP recipient, so who was on food stamps, it used to be called the food stamp program. We took their weekly budget and came up with healthy meals that we put together based on our research to really kind of show people that, look, you can eat healthy on a budget. And so that's a really great resource that we found has wide appeal.
And I don't know if you know this specifically. I mean, if not, I can speak to it just ever so briefly, just about there actually are, everything that we've talked about, heavy metals, plastics, there actually are a lot of studies related specifically to autoimmunity.
Yes.
But I thought I got it from you guys, but perhaps not about farmers and autoimmunity and lupus. Was yes. With their exposure,
pesticides. Yes, we actually just did a briefing yesterday on Capitol Hill about 2,4-D, which is basically a very, very highly toxic pesticide that had been limited in its use. But what's happened with genetically engineered food and what we found is that the crops that are genetically engineered and genetically engineered Roundup, for example, we found that weeds have become resistant to the herbicide that's used around these crops. So we have super weeds that are growing. So what we're finding is that with genetically engineered food that we thought that we could help deal with reducing pesticides, we're actually having to use more pesticides. And right now, Dow Chemical Company is trying to get additional support from the EPA and approval from the EPA for a super toxic pesticide that has been linked specifically to Parkinson's disease and farmers to be applied and be okay for use in the U.S. So that's something that we're really working on. So that's another really interesting issue. We kind of, our point of view is that the health impacts of genetically engineered food we don't know enough about, but we need to make sure it's labeled because 64 other countries, including Syria and China, let their citizens know if a product contains genetically engineered food or not. But we don't have that in the United States. So that's another reason to go organic, because it is genetically engineered free. But we're finding that the use of pesticides absolutely has been linked to a lot of these neurological issues.
It's really scary. And I definitely use the guides. I mean, I typically, if I can, which here in Austin, home to Whole Foods, and lots of farmers markets, I'm very lucky that I get to eat pretty much all organic in my house. But when I go out, I'll often, even if I'm getting like a juice and, I'll look and I'll know, okay, well, no, that's a top pesticide, or if I'm getting a smoothie somewhere or something like that, or even ordering a salad, and I might leave off one of the foods that I know, or I might, alter what I was going to eat, knowing that in the restaurant it's not all organic. Usually it's not organic at all. And so that's another place that I find it helpful, because we typically tell people, oh, this is great for when you're shopping, but also when you eat out, knowing, do I really want to eat that? Or maybe at this restaurant, I'm going to get this instead because I know that I'm not going to get the strawberries for dessert or whatever it is,
Right. Exactly. Very good choices to be making, especially because, not every restaurant can be organic. We totally understand that, but it's a nice tool for you to use.
Yeah. So what are you guys working on? What's coming down the pike with EWG? I mean, I feel like there's, you're really trying to tackle so many different areas, which we are, absolutely appreciate. But is there anything that you're really focusing on right now as an organization?
Sure. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Amy, and thanks, for the opportunity just to connect with you. It's always such a pleasure, and also all the folks that are, on your team and following you and your tremendous advice and how you've helped heal so many people. We're really interested, again, in this whole connection between environment and health. We're putting a lot of resources behind genetically engineered food and trying to, like chemicals, like these low-dose exposures to chemicals that we don't have answers for. We want those answers. We also want answers about genetically engineered food. What is it doing to us? Is there a connection between leaky gut syndrome and GE foods? How do we know what we're eating? We really want transparency. We really want the right to know. We're also concerned about what GE on a large scale means for us in the United States, as I mentioned, with this new pesticide that's highly toxic being potentially be approved by EPA. So we're focusing on that a lot. Flame retardants are used to douse pretty much all kinds of upholstery, kids' pajamas, you name it. And these are chemicals that are trying to basically prevent, clothes from catching on fire, sofas from catching on fire, which of course is a noble and important goal. But what we found over the years is that these chemicals are showing up in our bodies. We did a body burden study a couple years ago, and we're going to have one that will be released really soon about mothers and toddlers and their exposure to flame retardants. And we're finding that toddlers have a much higher, like 3 times greater exposure to flame retardants than their mothers, because they're around all of these kids' products that have been doused with this chemical. And this chemical has also been associated with neurological development issues, with hormone disruption, with ADHD and different all kinds of slew of different health issues. So that's something that we're working on, is really trying to raise awareness about the use of flame retardants, really asking firefighters, asking people. Firefighters actually have super high levels of this in their blood as well, because they're exposed to it, and just really saying, look, what is the risk analysis here with respect to chemical that is everywhere and contaminated everything, and it's at this low dose exposure versus the second or two that they think it may work, and we're finding sometimes that these chemicals aren't actually working when it comes to retarding the fire. So there's other avenues out there.
Wow, it didn't even work after all that.
Yeah, and there's a great investigation that Chicago Tribune did too about this whole issue and about kind of the influence peddling of the lobby of the chemical manufacturers to try to get this to be applied to consumer products, especially kids' products across the country.
A huge number of people with autoimmunity, with cancer, with neurologic diseases, with pretty much all chronic diseases. But can you just speak to that total body burden for a minute?
Sure, absolutely. So we know we're born, right, not as a clean slate. We know that babies are born with up to 300 industrial pollutants in their blood already. And then we have these daily chronic low-dose exposures, whether it's lotions, the personal care products we're using, whether it's flame retardants and PJs that children are wearing, or off-gassing from crib mattresses, the plastics we use. I mean, wherever we go, we're in contact with these different chemicals at very low doses that end up, we either are ingesting them, we're breathing them, or they're being absorbed through our skin. And so what does that do, over a 70-year time horizon, or an 80-year, or a 40-year, or a 30-year? And we don't know. Mm-hmm. What we do know is really troubling, and I know I've heard you talk about this before, Amy, and I'm sure your book is going to cover it, is the trends that we're seeing. Early onset of puberty is something that is really troubling. We're seeing that, girls, the average age of their onset of puberty was 16 and a half in 1860, and now it's 10 and a half. And, we know that there are all these chemicals that were never on the market, in the turn of the century, that act as estrogens now that our kids are exposed to. And that's not only products, but also the food that we're eating. A lot of these chemicals in food as well. So we know that we're seeing that. We're seeing trends with respect to different cancers rise. I mean, thyroid cancer is an emerging cancer. I know we talked about your experience with your thyroid. My husband's a thyroid cancer survivor. I mean, we're just seeing different cancers. We're seeing all of these issues, whether it be lupus, Parkinson's, you name it. We're seeing upward trends. And not all of it can be explained by better reporting. Mm-hmm. So I think more and more and there's concerns and troubling information that's coming up about autism. And so, and we don't know the link, we don't know the cause, but we do know that there's heavy metals associated with autism, that some scientists think there's some specific exposures that could, in development, that could lead to it or impact it or mm-hmm. affect it. But we just have all of this uncertainty. But what we do know, so we have the uncertainty as the outcomes, but what we do know in the certainty is that we are all born pre-polluted, and we're constantly being assaulted with these small dose chronic exposures that build up in our bodies over time. Mm-hmm. So definitely hold your members of Congress accountable. Please get involved with EWG. Definitely vote with your wallet. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing, which is so interesting for a group like ours that was founded in Washington, it was all about policy change and cutting edge science and media. We're finding that consumers are driving companies towards better, healthier choices, better, healthier ingredients, better, healthier options. And then the companies are following. Mm-hmm. And once the companies start to move in that direction, we're now seeing the Hill mm-hmm. start to at least entertain the idea and start being much more receptive to these concepts. So definitely vote with your pocketbook as well and support the brands that you believe in. And if you have questions about a brand that you love, call them and ask them. Mm-hmm. Do you have parabens? Why do you have parabens? Do you have phthalates? Why do you have phthalates? Or mm-hmm. Tell me about endocrine disrupting chemicals in your products. Why are they there? Because we are seeing really big brands make those moves and look for alternatives. And it's really important for not only patients to use their voice in their healthcare, but also that voice, like standing up, means that you really make a change in your community. Mm-hmm. And especially if you can do it with your community, it's really exciting to see what can happen.
A suggestion that Bob Root, he owns a company, Keys Soap. I don't know if you're familiar with him at all, but that's a great product line. We carry it. You could literally almost eat it. And I was asking him kind of his thoughts, and he said, rather than just throwing out you decide you want to throw out the 409 or you want to throw out your shampoo, rather than literally throwing them in the trash, take them back to the store. And when they ask why are you returning it, you say, because I found out that it has chemicals that cause cancer or autoimmunity or whatever, and then I don't want to buy this product, and then it will get back to the manufacturer. I would never would have ever come up with that. Good. I thought it was a great idea. So I guess we can throw that in there too. Encourage people, rather than throwing things out, to be returning them to the store. So it goes back to the manufacturer as, I'm standing up. I don't want this, chemical in whatever product.
Absolutely.
Well, great. I've asked everybody, as our sort of parting question, and I think you've already answered it earlier, but we can sort of restate it, or if you come up with something different, that's also fine. 3 to 5 sort of take home actionable steps that people can do today to start, protecting themselves or reversing an autoimmune disease. So maybe we can just put in there protecting themselves from these environmental toxins. 3 to 5 things people can do.
The first thing I would say is filter your tap water. The second would be buy organic. The third, it's going to be a tie, so I'm going to give you 5. Can I give
Yeah, of course. I said 3 to 5, so no pressure. If you want to give me 10, you can give me 10. But
the third would be avoid fragrance. The fourth would be become a label reader of everything that you buy, you know, whether it's food, whether it's personal care products, whether it's cleaners. And the 5 would be really make your voice heard with the brands that you love that may not be doing the right things, or with your elected officials, because I know you've heard me say this before, Amy, but democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to get in the game and make your voice heard, and it's amazing what you can do when you speak up.